The morning sun cast a golden glow over the quiet suburban street as a taxi pulled up to the curb. The driver helped unload 2 worn duffel bags onto the sidewalk before driving away. Standing there in his pressed uniform, the Marine took a deep breath and looked up at the modest 2-story house before him. After serving 3 grueling tours in Afghanistan, he was finally home, not just back on American soil, but standing in front of his very own house. He had purchased the property site unseen while deployed, working with a realtor through video calls and signed documents sent across oceans. The photos hadn't done justice to what he now saw, a 1960s rancher with faded blue paint, shutters hanging slightly crooked, and an overgrown yard that hadn't seen proper care in months. But it was his, all his. The neighbors peeked through curtains as he walked up the cracked concrete path. The Marine had earned numerous medals for bravery under fire, but this moment, stepping into civilian life permanently, somehow felt more intimidating than facing enemy combatants. Inside, the house smelled of dust and neglect. Empty rooms echoed as he walked from one to another, his boots leaving tracks on the dusty hardwood floors. The kitchen had outdated appliances, the bathroom needed new fixtures, and the backyard was a jungle of weeds. Yet he couldn't stop smiling. This place represented everything he had fought for, a piece of the American dream, a chance to build something lasting. That first night, he slept on the floor in a sleeping bag, much like he had done countless times overseas. But here, instead of worrying about surprise attacks, he dreamed of paint colors, garden layouts, and furniture arrangements. The transformation began the very next day. He attacked the renovation with the same discipline and determination that had carried him through military service. Early mornings were spent ripping out old carpeting and tearing down damaged drywall. Afternoons found him at hardware stores, learning about home repairs from how-to videos and friendly staff who thanked him for his service when they noticed his military haircut and bearing. Neighbors watched with growing interest as the eyesore of the block gradually became something different. The Marine didn't just fix what was broken, he improved everything he touched. He installed energy-efficient windows, rebuilt the sagging front porch, and replaced the worn roof with new shingles. The sound of hammering and power tools became a constant weekend symphony. As spring arrived, he turned his attention to the yard. What had been an overgrown mess soon featured neatly trimmed grass and carefully planned flower beds. Along the back fence, he created something special, a small garden with benches and a flagpole. Here, he planted flowers representing the birthplaces of comrades who hadn't made it home. A simple stone marker bore no names, just the words, "For those who gave all." Each evening after working on the house, he would sit in this memorial space with a cup of coffee, sometimes talking quietly to friends who would never answer. The neighbors couldn't hear what he said, but they could see his dedication as he tended this sacred space with particular care. By summer's end, the transformation was remarkable. Fresh paint in warm tan with deep blue trim made the house stand out for all the right reasons. The lawn earned admiring glances from passers-by. Inside, the rooms were simply but thoughtfully furnished, comfortable couches, solid wood tables, and walls adorned with photos of desert landscapes and smiling soldiers arm in arm. The crowning touch came when he installed the flagpole in the front yard. Each morning, he would rise with the sun to raise the American flag with the same solemn respect he had shown during military ceremonies. Each evening, he carefully folded it into the traditional triangle before going inside. After months of work, the house had truly become a home, a sanctuary built by his own hands, a place of peace after years of chaos and danger. He had found his place in the world again, creating order and beauty from neglect, just as he hoped to do with his own life going forward. The for sale sign on the house next door lasted barely 2 weeks before a moving truck appeared one Saturday morning. The Marine watched from his porch, sipping coffee, as movers carried in expensive furniture and carefully wrapped artwork. Unlike his own modest belongings, everything going into the neighboring house seemed brand new and high-end. Around midday, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged couple stepped out, dressed in what looked like designer clothes, surveying their new property with expressions that suggested they'd found it somewhat lacking. The man immediately began directing the movers with sharp gestures, while the woman stood with arms crossed, frowning at something on her phone. The Marine, always believing in being neighborly, walked over with a freshly baked apple pie he'd made himself, a skill learned from a fellow soldier during downtime overseas. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he called out with a genuine smile. "Thought you might enjoy something homemade after a long moving day." The couple turned, and their expressions shifted instantly. The man's eyes narrowed, while the woman's eyebrows shot up. There was a moment, just a flash, where their surprise at seeing who their neighbor was registered plainly on their faces. "Oh," the woman said, her voice suddenly tight. "How thoughtful." The man reluctantly took the pie, holding it awkwardly like it might bite him. "We're quite busy," he said curtly. "Lots to unpack." "Of course," the Marine replied, still smiling though he'd caught their reaction. "I'm just next door if you need anything. Tools, recommendations for local shops, whatever helps you settle in." "We'll be fine," the man said, already turning away. The woman didn't even offer that much, simply walking toward their house. Over the following days, the Marine tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Moving was stressful for anyone. Perhaps they were just overwhelmed. But the pattern became clear when they'd turn and walk the other direction if they spotted him checking his mail. When he waved, they pretended not to see. Then came the neighborhood block party, an annual tradition that the Marine had looked forward to as a chance to better integrate into the community. He spent hours smoking brisket and preparing his grandmother's famous potato salad recipe. Everyone on the street received invitations, including the new neighbors. The day of the party arrived with perfect weather. Families gathered in his backyard, children playing catch while adults chatted around tables laden with food. Everyone from the block came, except the couple next door. Later that evening, as the party wound down, the Marine noticed them watching from their upstairs window. When his eyes met theirs, they quickly drew the curtains shut. The following morning, while tending his memorial garden, he overheard their conversation through the fence. "Can you believe they let people like that buy houses in this neighborhood?" The woman hissed, not bothering to keep her voice down. "Property values will plummet." "Did you see all those people at his house yesterday?" The man replied, noisy and inconsiderate. "We should have checked who lived here before buying." The Marine's hands stilled on the flowers he was pruning. He'd faced enemy fire and seen the worst of humanity in war zones, but somehow these words, spoken so casually in this peaceful neighborhood, cut deeper than expected. Still, he took a deep breath and continued caring for his garden. That afternoon, he received notes from neighbors thanking him for the wonderful party. Mrs. Chen from across the street left a container of homemade dumplings on his porch with a kind note. The Rodriguez family sent their teenage son over with a thank you card signed by everyone. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. While one house radiated coldness, the rest of the neighborhood had embraced him. The Marine decided to keep focusing on the positive connections he was building, though he couldn't help noticing how the couple watched his every move from behind their curtains, their faces set in permanent scowls whenever their eyes met his. Some battles aren't worth fighting, he told himself, remembering words from his old sergeant, but he couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing next door, one that would eventually break over his carefully built sanctuary. As summer faded into fall, the Cold War between the houses turned increasingly hostile. What began as awkward encounters and pointed glares evolved into something far more deliberate. The first incident happened on a Tuesday night. The Marine had an early morning appointment at the VA hospital and turned in at 9, only to be jolted awake at midnight by thundering music from next door. The bass vibrated his windows and pictures rattled on his walls. After 30 sleepless minutes, he finally walked over and rang their doorbell. The man opened the door with a drink in hand, music blaring behind him. "Mind turning it down a bit? Got an early morning tomorrow?" the Marine asked politely. "This is our house," the man replied with a smirk. "We paid good money to enjoy it however we want." The music continued until 2 a.m. before abruptly shutting off. The next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, the Marine found his driveway blocked by the couple's second car, a sporty convertible parked at an angle that made it impossible for him to get his truck out. He had to walk to the bus stop in the rain, arriving late for his appointment. When he returned home that afternoon, the car was gone, but the pattern had been established. Whenever he had somewhere important to be, somehow their vehicle would end up blocking his exit. The couple always had excuses ready. "We didn't realize," or "it was just for a minute." Then came the complaints. First to the police, noise complaints about gatherings that never happened. Officers would knock on his door looking embarrassed as they explained someone had reported a wild party at his address, only to find him alone reading a book or working in his yard. Next were the Homeowners Association violations. Letters appeared in his mailbox weekly. His grass was supposedly too long. It wasn't. His trash cans had been left out too long. They hadn't. His holiday decorations violated some obscure rule. They didn't. Each complaint required documentation, photographs, and formal responses that ate up his evenings after long workdays. The Marine handled each issue with the patience and discipline forged through military service. He documented everything, taking time-stamped photos of his properly maintained yard and keeping a journal of each incident. The HOA president, a retired schoolteacher who had grown increasingly apologetic with each baseless complaint, eventually started calling him directly to warn him about new accusations before sending formal notices. "They're at it again," she would sigh. "Something about your fence this time." Neighbors began to notice too. The young couple across the street offered security camera footage showing the man from next door deliberately moving the Marine's trash cans to the street on non-pickup days. Others reported witnessing similar petty acts. Despite everything, the Marine continued improving his property. He built a charming stone pathway through his front yard and planted flowering bushes that would bloom in different seasons. His garden became a bright spot on the street, drawing compliments from everyone except the couple next door, who only complained about the mess of mulch or the noise of his gardening. When the Neighborhood Association announced their annual beautification awards, few were surprised that the Marine's thoughtfully designed landscape won Best Garden. The small ceremony took place on a Saturday morning, with the association president presenting a modest plaque to be displayed in his yard. As neighbors applauded, the couple next door watched from their driveway, faces twisted with obvious displeasure. The woman whispered something to her husband, who nodded with a dark expression that sent a chill through those who noticed. That night, as the Marine placed the small award plaque near his front flower bed, he caught them staring from their window. Their faces held something beyond the usual disdain, something that looked unsettlingly like hatred. Just let it go, he told himself, turning back to his garden. He'd faced far worse than unfriendly neighbors during his service. Still, years of military training had taught him to recognize when hostility was about to escalate into action. Something in their expressions suggested a line was about to be crossed. The question wasn't if they would make a more serious move, but when. An envelope arrived in the mail containing an invitation that brought a rare smile to the Marine's face. His former platoon leader was getting married 3 states away, and the wedding would reunite many of the men and women he'd served with. After months of dealing with his troublesome neighbors, the chance to spend a weekend with people who truly had his back felt like a lifeline. He prepared his house carefully before leaving, setting timers for lights, asking the teenage son from the Rodriguez family to collect his mail, and even installing a simple security camera facing his front door, a precaution that seemed increasingly necessary given recent events. The wedding weekend was exactly what he needed: laughter, stories shared with people who understood, and the comfortable feeling of being completely accepted. For 2 days, he didn't think about the problems waiting at home. That changed Sunday evening when his phone buzzed with repeated messages. The Rodriguez boy had gone to water the memorial garden as promised and found the front door standing wide open. The messages grew increasingly frantic: water everywhere, walls all messed up, everything broken. The Marine made the 5-hour drive home in just under 4, his knuckles white on the steering wheel the entire time. Nothing could have prepared him for what he found. His front door had been forced open, splintered near the lock. Inside, destruction spread through every room. Furniture lay overturned and broken. The television screen was shattered. In the kitchen, someone had poured what smelled like bleach over his appliances. But the personal touches hurt most. Family photos had been torn from frames and ripped to pieces. The shadow box containing his medals and unit patches was smashed, the contents scattered. Everywhere he looked, spray paint covered the walls with words so hateful he couldn't bring himself to read them fully. He moved through the house in a daze, cataloging the damage with the detached precision he'd once used to assess bombed buildings. His bedroom was ransacked, mattress slashed open. In the bathroom, Concrete had been poured down drains. The basement stood in ankle-deep water from cut pipes, family heirlooms floating like debris after a storm. Neighbors gathered outside, their faces showing shock and anger on his behalf. Mrs. Chen brought coffee. The Rodriguez family helped place tarps over broken windows. No one spoke the obvious truth. They all knew who had done this. The final blow came when he stepped into his backyard. The memorial garden, his tribute to fallen friends, had been completely devastated. Plants were uprooted, the small bench overturned, and the flagpole snapped in half. The marker stone had been dragged to the center of the destruction and defaced with the same hateful words that covered his walls. As he knelt beside the ruined garden, something inside him went very quiet and still, the same deadly calm he'd felt in combat situations when everything narrowed to what must be done next. A hand touched his shoulder. The retired cop from down the street stood there, pointing to something half-hidden in the flood, the security camera, torn from its mount but potentially intact. They might not have noticed the memory card, he said quietly. The Marine nodded, carefully retrieving the device. If the footage survived, it might tell the story his heart already knew, that the smiling couple next door, who were conspicuously absent from the neighbors gathered to help, had waited for his absence to destroy everything he'd built. As night fell and rain began to patter on the tops covering his broken windows, the Marine sat on his front step, surrounded by neighbors offering help, shelter, and barely contained outrage on his behalf. The damage was estimated at over $75,000, nearly everything he owned ruined in a single weekend of hate. But one thing remained intact, his resolve. The police arrived within minutes of the Marine's call. 2 officers, one older with gray at his temples and one barely looking old enough to carry a badge, walked through the destroyed home with expressions that shifted from professional detachment to barely concealed outrage. "I've been on the force 20 years, the older officer said, shaking his head as he photographed the spray-painted slurs. "Never seen anything this deliberate in our town." The younger officer was carefully bagging pieces of a broken doorframe. "Looks like they used a crowbar here. Didn't even try to hide the forced entry." Outside, more patrol cars arrived. The neighbors gave statements, telling officers about the ongoing harassment, the false complaints, and the couple next door who had made their feelings about the Marine painfully clear. Mrs. Chen described seeing unusual activity at the house while the Marine was away. "Their car left very late Friday night and returned early Saturday morning," she said. "I noticed because they had their headlights off when they came back." The retired cop who had found the camera stayed close to the Marine, occasionally placing a steady hand on his shoulder when the younger man's composure threatened to crack while surveying particularly personal destruction. "Let's check that footage," he suggested quietly when the initial documentation was complete. The memory card had survived, and the Marine's laptop, one of the few items spared only because he'd taken it with him to the wedding, soon displayed the damning evidence. The camera had captured clear images of the couple from next door approaching his house Friday night, the man carrying what looked like a duffel bag of tools. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. Even more damning was footage from Saturday morning. The couple returned, this time entering through the now broken front door in broad daylight, carrying containers of what would turn out to be paint and bleach. The camera recorded 40 minutes before they noticed it and tore it down, but by then, their faces were clearly identifiable in multiple frames. The police officers watched the footage twice, their expressions grim. The older officer made a call, speaking in low tones about escalating and bringing in specialists. An hour later, the street filled with more officials, detectives in suits, evidence technicians with specialized equipment, and remarkably, 2 agents who identified themselves as FBI. When property damage targets someone because of their race, especially a veteran, one agent explained, it potentially falls under federal hate crime statutes. The couple next door watched the growing law enforcement presence from their windows. When officers approached their door with a warrant, they initially refused to answer. Eventually, they emerged, dressed in expensive loungewear, expressions outraged as officers explained they were being detained for questioning. "This is ridiculous," the woman shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We were visiting family all weekend. We have rights." Her protests faltered when an officer held up a phone showing a clear image of her face from the security footage. Her husband immediately demanded a lawyer. As they were escorted to separate patrol cars, neighbors stood silently watching. No one offered support or seemed surprised by the arrests. Inside the Marine's damaged home, investigators carefully documented everything. They collected paint samples from the walls, took casts of footprints in the spilled soil from the memorial garden, and bagged torn pieces of photos as evidence. "We found matching paint cans in their garage," a detective told the Marine later that evening. "Same brand as what's on your walls. They still had dirt from your garden on their shoes, and we found a receipt for concrete mix purchased Friday afternoon." The Marine listened quietly, his military training evident in his composed demeanor despite the chaos surrounding him. But when the detective mentioned finding pieces of his medals in the couple's trash, something flickered in his eyes, a quiet resolve that had carried him through gunfire and would now carry him through this battlefield too. "What happens next?" he asked simply. "Justice happens next," the detective replied. The morning after the arrests, the Marine woke on the Rodriguez family's pull-out couch. His own bed was destroyed, his home uninhabitable. The retired schoolteacher who headed the HOA had organized a rotation of neighbors offering spare rooms until he could sort things out. While others might have been consumed by anger or thoughts of revenge, the Marine approached his situation with the same disciplined strategy he'd applied in combat zones. Where some saw only destruction, he saw a problem to solve methodically. His first call was to his insurance company. The claims adjuster who arrived that afternoon walked through the ruins of his home with growing disbelief. "In 20 years, I've never seen damage this extensive or deliberate," she said, taking photos of each room. "This goes beyond standard vandalism coverage." His second call was to a law firm specializing in civil rights cases. The receptionist, hearing the bare details of his situation, immediately connected him to a senior partner. "Don't touch anything else in the house," the attorney advised. "We're sending someone today." This is exactly the kind of case our firm was founded to address. By noon, his quiet streak had transformed into a hub of activity. Insurance inspectors documented damage. Restoration companies provided estimates. The law firm sent not one but 3 attorneys who walked through the house with expressions that hardened with each room they entered. "They'll face criminal charges from the state and likely federal prosecutors," the lead attorney explained. "But we'll also pursue civil damages for everything they've done, not just property damage, but emotional distress, harassment, and civil rights violations." While signing preliminary paperwork, the Marine's phone rang. The caller identified himself as a former Marine who had served in another unit, now working as a prosecutor specializing in hate crimes. "Word travels fast among Marines," the prosecutor said. "I heard what happened. I want this case." More calls followed throughout the day. A buddy from his platoon, now a judge in a neighboring county, called to offer legal advice. Another former Marine, who owned a construction company 3 towns over, promised to bring a crew as soon as the insurance company cleared the site. Marines take care of their own, each caller reminded him. The couple who had destroyed his home appeared for their arraignment the following morning. The Marines sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, watching as they entered in orange jumpsuits, looking much less intimidating than they had over the fence. Their expensive attorney argued passionately for release on bail, citing their community's standing and lack of prior arrests. Then the prosecutor stood. He methodically laid out not just the weekend's destruction, but the pattern of harassment leading up to it. He played portions of the security footage for the judge, who watched with increasing disgust as the couple spray-painted hateful words on the walls of the veteran's home. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, "the defendants didn't just damage property. They targeted a decorated combat veteran because of his race. They destroyed irreplaceable mementos of his military service. They defaced a memorial to fallen soldiers. And the evidence suggests this was the culmination of months of escalating harassment, all documented by neighbors and the Homeowners Association." The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and clear danger to the community. As the couple was led away, they caught sight of the Marine in the back row. For the first time, their expressions showed something new: fear. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Someone had tipped off the media, and the story, with its clear villains and hero, was irresistible. The Marine declined interviews, but neighbors were less reticent. He fought for this country only to come home and face this? Mrs. Chen told a reporter, tears in her eyes. It's shameful. The story spread quickly, first locally, then nationally. By evening, the Marines' phone was flooded with messages of support from across the country. Veterans groups offered assistance. Contractors volunteered services. A furniture company pledged to replace everything that had been destroyed. That night, staying in yet another neighbor's guest room, the Marine reviewed the civil lawsuit his attorneys had prepared. The damages sought were substantial, far more than the couple's home was worth. Their lives would never be the same after this, their reputations destroyed, their finances ruined. For a moment, he hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. Was this too harsh? Then he remembered his memorial garden, the deliberate desecration of a tribute to fallen friends who would never come home. He thought of the medals his grandfather had pinned on his uniform, now in pieces. His hand steadied as he signed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced hatred for who they were rather than what they had done. 6 months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came the verdicts. The criminal trial lasted just 4 days. The evidence was overwhelming: security footage, matching paint on the couple's clothing, neighborhood testimony about months of harassment, and even text messages between the couple planning what they called taking back the neighborhood. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: breaking and entering, vandalism, property destruction, and federal hate crime charges. At the sentencing hearing, the Marine stood in his dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. When offered the chance to address the court, he spoke briefly but with quiet power. "I went overseas to protect American freedoms for everyone, including those who hate me for how I look," he said, his voice steady. "I never expected to face such hatred at home. But I still believe in justice rather than revenge, in law rather than chaos. That's what I fought for. That's what I still believe in." The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, sentenced the couple to 5 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of $175,000. The civil trial ended even more decisively. Faced with insurmountable evidence, the couple's attorneys advised settling. The final amount remained confidential, but rumors suggested it consumed their life savings and future earnings for years to come. Their jobs disappeared. The man fired from his executive position when company leadership saw the hate-filled messages on his phone. The woman asked to resign from her real estate firm when clients began canceling listings. Their carefully cultivated social connections evaporated overnight. But for the Marine, life moved in a different direction. On a bright Saturday morning in early summer, a convoy of trucks pulled onto his street. Fellow veterans in construction hats poured out, carrying tools and supplies. The renovation company owned by his former squad mate had brought volunteers from 3 states away. "We're rebuilding right," the construction company owner announced, slapping the Marines back. Better than before. They worked with military precision. Damaged walls came down, plumbing was replaced, new wiring installed. Neighbors brought food, offered extra hands, and checked in daily on the progress. A furniture maker who had served in the Navy crafted custom pieces for every room. A landscaping company owned by a Gold Star family designed a new, expanded memorial garden with a proper stone monument and flagpole that could be seen from the entire street. As summer progressed, the transformation was remarkable. The house that had been a scene of hatred became a symbol of resilience. Local news stations covered the renovation as an example of community healing. The foreclosure notice appeared on the couple's home next door in late August. With both owners incarcerated and their assets drained by legal fees and settlements, the bank reclaimed the property. It sat empty for 2 months before a young family, a doctor, her wife, and their 2 children, purchased it at a reduced price. The Marine greeted them with freshly baked cookies and a genuine smile, the first new neighbors to receive such a welcome since the ordeal began. The family, initially nervous about the home's history, soon became regular visitors for backyard barbecues. "This is what healing looks like," the Marine told a reporter who followed up on the story 1 year after the vandalism. "This is what winning looks like." The final piece fell into place when the settlement money arrived. After rebuilding his home and life, the Marine had a decision to make about the remaining funds. He spent weeks considering options before calling his attorney with instructions. At a small ceremony attended by local veterans and neighbors, he announced the creation of a foundation dedicated to helping veterans facing housing discrimination and hate crimes. The organization would provide legal assistance, temporary housing, and renovation services to veterans in need. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best opportunities, he said, cutting the ribbon on the foundation's small office downtown. This isn't just about what happened to me anymore. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to someone else, and making sure that when it does, nobody faces it alone. 2 years from that terrible weekend when he returned to destruction, his street had transformed. New neighbors filled both sides, his renovated home stood prouder than ever. And the memorial garden had doubled in size, becoming a quiet place of reflection for the entire community. Where hatred had tried to destroy, something stronger had grown. The couple who thought they could break a Marine's spirit through destruction had instead given him a new mission, one that would help others long after the scars on his property had faded. The final story wasn't about what they had done to him, but about what he had built from the wreckage, not just a house, but a legacy of resilience, forgiveness, and justice that would outlast any act of hate.